When you choose to earn your degree online from Southern New Hampshire University, you're saying yes to new opportunities and to new adventures. You're saying yes to something big, something you've always wanted to do. If earning your degree is one of your goals this new year, SNHU can help you get there. With low online tuition, no set class times, and multiple term starts per year, you can set the pace that works for you and save money along the way. Visit snhu.edu today to get started.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Typology. You know the drill. This is the podcast on which we explore the mystery of the human personality and really the whole of the human adventure through the lens of the Enneagram. I'm joined by my great friend Anthony Skinner, my producer, my confrere. Welcome back, Anthony.
2, 3, 4. I'm doing a little box breathing, Ian. Prepping for our guest
you've
today.
had a very for our guest today, no doubt. And we have such an interesting guest today. We want to welcome Enneagram 3 with a 2-wing, Ben Katt, author of the new book, The Way Home, Discovering the Hero's Journey to Wholeness at Midlife. Ben, welcome to the show.
Oh, I love the energy. Thank you. I'm here for it.
This is right on time. I'm in midlife, so I'm ready for this.
I know. You're talking to two guys in midlife. This is your big moment.
Well,
we need a hero's.
It keeps growing like larger, the spectrum of what midlife is. That's what I think.
True.
Well, we're gonna dive into all of this stuff, but you are an Enneagram 3, and tell us how you learned about the Enneagram and what the Enneagram taught you about you.
Yeah, so 10-ish years ago, probably 8, 9, 10 years ago, I was part of this leadership cohort. So I was a pastor at the time. I had started a church almost a decade earlier. Alongside of that, it started a few other nonprofits that our community, was engaged in, and it was all really good, meaningful work. And yet I was, ready for a transition. So I was part of this leadership cohort, and I remember I was in San Diego with this amazing community of people. And one of the coaches in this mix, we were at this like garden barbecue or something. And she just said to me, she's like, "Oh, you are so clearly a 3. I was like, a 3? What? I'm the second of 4 boys. So I'm a 2, I'm a middle child. I'm not a 3, whatever it was. And that was how my journey with the Enneagram began. Wow. She described it back to me like this achiever, performer. And I just resonated with all of that immediately. And the timing was perfect because this probably precipitated what came, but, getting acquainted with the Enneagram, but the time was perfect because a few months later, I began, as I was transitioning out of one of the organizations I founded, I experienced this big time burnout. Mm-hmm. And it was like having the language of the Enneagram really helped. But it probably got me to that point to acknowledge, probably helped with realizing I was burned out, because I was like, oh, look at how I'm functioning. And more importantly, look what I'm ignoring, right? The practices like silence and solitude and stillness, things like that are really crucial for, I've discovered, as to be a more wholehearted Enneagram 3.
So it's interesting you should mention contemplative practices or disciplines like solitude, silence, meditation, for some people centering prayer, some people journaling. These are not immediate go-tos for Enneagram 3s, I will tell you right out the bat, because they don't seem very productive and they seem very inefficient. And for many 3s, that's a non-starter. How do you explain your attraction to the contemplative life?
Yeah, I mean, it was out of desperation. A number of years earlier, so previous to that season of my life, I actually had a regular practice. This was like a perk of being a pastor, is if you make room for it, you can have, build into your life space for withdrawing or retreating. And so on every other Friday, maybe every Friday, but I had this regular rhythm. I would drive north and go to this old mansion that used to be owned by a Boeing exec. I was living in Seattle at the time, but had converted into a Dominican nun center. And so you could go there and retreat. And so I would go there, and sometimes, I was in the midst of starting this church, had a young family. I would, sometimes I'd fall asleep or I'd read scripture, but I was trying on the contemplative life. Like I did always have this sort of, I tried to nurture even from a young age that kind of inner life through these different spiritual disciplines or contemplative practices. Now, what happened is my threeness in terms of its unhealthy aspects really took over from that point, because as the church plant or the nonprofit, as these things went from like ideas or like startup to reality with actual people and community and budgets and visions and all this stuff, the first thing to go in order so that we could succeed in a way, and then also shout out to my two-wing, probably help more people, was, I cut those things out of my life. And so when I got to this point where I was burned out and had this one like epiphany on a morning run in which this voice welled up inside me and said, if you don't have your heart, you have nothing. I talk about this story in the book, but it was a total wake-up call. And I wanted to like crawl in a hole. And maybe part of that it was like a depressive episode, but maybe part of that wanting to crawl in a hole was just also I was like desperate for some solitude. So with the advice of a trusted mentor who I met later on that day when I had that little epiphany, or huge epiphany, I should say, it was life altering. I started journaling once again and making, space for these contemplative practices. I started practicing yoga for the first time. So there was a whole bunch of things that came together in that season. And my love for all of those inner arts really just grew over time.
So sometimes threes will say, I spent a lot of my life focused on seeming rather than being. Right? Like I wanted to seem successful. I wanted to seem like I had it together. I wanted to seem confident. I wanted to seem like a great leader. I wanted to, but in terms of substance, right? And being, I just wasn't focused on being at all. I was just focused on doing, and performing. And performing not only at work, but performing as the perfect husband or the perfect father or the perfect, the ideal this. I mean, I'm just intrigued that you were naturally sort of drawn to practices that focus on being versus doing. Yeah. Now, I suppose a three could take those on and say, well, I'm going to be the very best meditation guy, the very best yoga guy. You could bring that thing over and I'm going to use it to create a center that then I monetize and turn into something. I mean, that can happen. But you seem like, based on the book, The Way Home, Discover the Hero's Journey to Wholeness at Midlife, this new book of yours, I mean, this seems like it's pretty deeply penetrated into your person, this whole idea of being in touch with being, not just doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's the center really of everything. It's the thing that animates my life. I mean, on a very practical level, I have my twice daily meditation practice is the foundation for anything I do. And if I don't have that time of reconnecting with my being, I feel pretty, I feel disoriented, or I can sense like something's off. Yeah. And so not only my own practice, but then I've just found the power of this. So I teach other people meditation. I help other people access their inner being. But mind you, this was not like an overnight journey. While, I think being acquainted with the Enneagram back when in that burnout moment, it helped me see like, okay, to become more integrated, I got to kind of draw upon some of and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but some of the aspects of the 9, which my wife, I think most days is a 9, but like drawing upon some of those, it definitely sent me in that direction. And then really, I think there's probably part of me during this season, which is like the 5-6 years I explore in the book, where I'm really a soul searching season. There probably was something, I wouldn't say so much performative or seeming, but there maybe my achievement orientation was helpful, because it was like, I was not in the sense of trying to master, but trying to get acquainted with different spiritual practices and tend to my inner life. So then over time, some of that, maybe the more, if you could call that like an ambitious approach to that, like that curiosity, that stuff kind of burned off, and I'm left hopefully most days with the purest essence and, really generative practices that help sustain me and orient me in the world.
Sounds like you're winging 4 as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of 4 in there.
Yeah.
So how familiar are you with subtypes, Ben?
Like the wings and such. Is that
that is a kind of subtype, but more instinctual subtypes.
The social, the sexual. I know the language. I don't have a great grasp of it. And I will say, I've wondered, am I a 4? But I am so drawn to also helping people. So that's kind of where I've said maybe the wing is the 2. So let's get into it.
So the reason I say this is because, learning your Enneagram type is a journey, right? It's not like, it can take a minute to kind of land on things. And I'm not saying you're not a 3 with a 2 wing. I'm just, if I'm riffing out loud in my head, I'd say you have a lot of 4 influence, or you might be a self-pres 4 that often looks like a 3 or a 7. The reason I say this is we share a lot in common, right? Like I'm a 4, but I have a 3 wing, and but I'm a self-pres 4, which is kind of upside down. So it's not the stereotypical 4, which is the social 4. We're known as the glad 4. So and we're often confused with 3s or 7s.
Interesting. I did not know
But the unconscious motivation of the 4, right, is a need to be special and unique as a way to compensate for this feeling that and if not outright belief, that there's something missing at the core of our essential makeup that we need to compensate for. And so shame is a big issue for 4s. They're much more self-reflective than a 3 would be, more introverted. And now a 3 with a 4 wing would be more introverted than a 3 with a 2 wing. That 3 with a 2 wing would be much more extroverted typically. You strike me as having more either ambiverted energy, the meaning like sort of in the middle between extrovert and introvert.
I mean, I used to be like on a Myers-Briggs. I was like off the charts extrovert, but then I think I was kind of making that up because I like my hermitish life now.
Right. So when you get a chance, I just want you to check out self-preservation 4s.
Yeah.
You could, you go ahead, Anthony.
And this is, more fodder, but like we were just talking about how a lot of our guests, the titles of their books really point to their type, So obviously I'm not trying to type you, but The Way Home sounds so 4 to me, discovering the hero's journey to wholeness.
So, some of your some of your concerns in the book.
Yeah.
Okay, can I? This is bringing up something. So I don't necessarily the shame piece. I don't resonate with as much. I'm not saying I'm shameless, but I'd have to look into how that's described a little more. What I will say is, and this I do talk about in the book, is part of what like led to this soul searching season was after I left my roles. Okay, which was all these things I'd started. I was like, who am I? Okay. And I think the way I've traditionally looked at that is to say it was my achiever, right? I achieved all these things. And now I was separating myself from my achievements, but also, and that which in my mind would be more like a 3 thing, but hearing you talk about this with the 4, there's definitely part of so I went from kind of innovative, entrepreneurial startups. Okay, small and scrappy, but like the kind of thing people are like, oh, you do what? Tell me more about that, right? I went from that to like a denominational job. And within a couple of weeks, I was like, what am I doing here? Like I thought, I'm going to change the system from the inside. But it was the kind of role I was like, I don't want to tell anyone I do this. In part because it's like the people on the inside, they'll probably think I'm a heretic, and the people on the outside are like, you're doing what? And so I was very aware that I lost that sense of something unique that I was doing. So when you say that, I'm like, oh, I hear that. I hear that.
Another little caveat is 4s go to 2 in stress. So we can exhibit a lot of 2 behaviors.
And 4s are very, very empathic. And actually, some of the best therapists I know are 4s. Actually, some of the best spiritual directors I know are 4s. Highly intuitive. They can be very attuned to other people's feelings, but they're also very attuned to their own. Say like 3s, if I say the 3s are the type on the Enneagram who actually have the most feelings and also have the most trouble figuring out what they are. Right? They're like just feelings. They don't know really what to do with those, and these get in the way of productivity and efficiency. So I'd just rather not have them. But they have a lot of feelings. They're just confused by them. Yeah. 4s have tons of feelings. They can name them. They can articulate them. They can describe them. They can give you a color and a texture and a heat variant for each one of them. So I don't know if that sounds like you or not.
Well, I mean, that, like, it's hard to say. Is like, I feel like I'm very able to do that now. And part of that, some of that is it because I've just become more open to doing that. I've got more experience, so I can like name it. I love this. This is like a revelation potentially. Because, wouldn't a 4 like to be a 4?
But who knows?
Yeah. I know you're not typecasting. You're not saying this is you absolute, but I like these questions.
Explore the
really
shame
helpful.
a little bit, Ian. Like,
say more about that.
2s, 3s, and 4s are all in the shame triad, right? So shame, and actually, interestingly, now, I do have a friend of mine who's a very, very, very good teacher, actually Beatrice Chestnut, and she would say that shame is not the issue. She would say grief and sadness are the issue for 2s, 3s, and 4s. For 5, 6, and 7, it would be fear. For 8, 9, and 1, it would be anger. And for 2s, 3s, and 4s, in her mind, is really around grief and sadness. And it's a sadness about loss of connection to the true self and needing to project images in order to compensate for, like, I got to project an image of success if I'm a 3, or if I'm a 4, uniqueness and specialness. 2, being helpful, cheerful, affable, all that stuff. And there's a kind of core underlying sadness in it, I don't know where I land on that. Actually, I can see where shame is an issue for 2s, 3s, and 4s. It's a feeling that does seem to come up for them quite a bit, and shame would be really around, for the 4, is around this missing piece thing, that there's something wrong with me that was broken long ago through some episode or through something I don't remember, or it was taken away by life, but I feel somehow responsible for losing it, and there's some shame around that, and the feeling of not enough, really, the feeling of not enough. And needing to become somebody else in the case of a 3 in order to be enough, and for the 4 to be special and unique, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a long conversation, but I don't mind throwing a wrench in people's gears every now and then, because if nothing else, you'll read about any self-preservation 4s and you'll go, no, not me, I'm still a 3. And if that happens, fantastic.
Yeah, let's go for it.
You learned a little bit more about the Enneagram and yourself, and you feel more certain about it. But I would go to Beatrice Chestnut's book, The Complete Enneagram, and just check out self-preservation 4s. You could probably just look it up online or even buy the book. What does Beatrice Chestnut say about self-preservation 4s? Have you ever had a struggle with and this is tricky with the self-pres 4? Typically 4s have issues around envy. So there's a lot of comparing themselves to other people, and feeling like, I'm just not that interesting. I didn't go to as nice a school. They had a better childhood. They had a better this. They had better taste in clothes. Their house is better appointed than mine. It's a little bit like coming up short.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that. So, I mean, some of that is, if I even think of my being the second of 4 boys, and, always kind of like, well, the oldest one, he's the smart one. And the second one, he's the athlete. And the youngest one, he's also the athlete. And I'm kind of like, jack of many trades, master of none. I do a little of this, a little of that. So I can relate to it at that level. And I also think there's definitely been, there's seasons, and it feels very different now after sort of the journey I've been through. But I'll look at people and be like, I kind of wish instead of my path of like some of the things I did and where I went to school. I mean, I talk about that even in the book. Like, well, I kind of wish it was this other thing, and in this other kind of realm over here, and it got attention like this. And at my best, I think there can be a healthy side of envy in a way, but like allowing that to direct me towards what I'm longing for, not in a sort of pretending or just like that kind of thing, but like, the fact that this person is going on this journey and they're investing in like a meditation practice, and say becoming a meditation teacher. Why do I keep thinking, that would be cool, and I wish I was doing that? So, well, maybe because I should do it, or I could do it. Sure,
yeah, and that's the motivating side of envy, right? But sometimes 4s can get sort of stuck in this place of if only. If only back then I had done this, then this would be different now. So there's this sort of idealized past, a little bit of an idealized future, and they're kind of stuck in the between them. And if only I'd gone to Harvard instead of Cambridge. If only I'd done this and I got taken a left instead of gone right. And if I'd only waited to get married or didn't wait to get married, whatever it is, there's a lot of pining and longing. But for the self-pres 4, see, it's different. The envy is not as obvious for the self-pres 4. It's there, but it's just not as hot as it is for the other two. And they're a little bit more motivated by envy to get those things for themselves rather than just sort of stew about them.
Yeah, I don't feel like I stew. So that's also why I kind of naturally went, I feel motivated by it sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, I don't think you're a social 4, right? Or a 1-to-1 4. But a self-pres 4, see, here's another thing about self-pres 4s. They're long suffering and they tend to suffer quietly. And versus, the social 4 just suffers radiantly, loudly. You can just feel it coming off them sometimes, right? Yeah. And sometimes with an unhealthy 1-to-1 4, the suffering is projected onto others, and then they can be, sometimes aggressive. We call them the mad 4s, right? So glad 4, sad 4, mad 4. Glad 4 is the self-pres. So there's this kind of optimism, and there's
okay. So I'm not signing up for it yet. No. But however, you said the story in the book really is this acknowledgement of this beneath the surface kind of grief or suffering, and almost saying, well, I haven't suffered in these horrible ways like other people, but like finally being like, I actually have to name the pain that I've carried or name my wounds, and that's okay. And by the time, like when I got into them, it wasn't like, oh, I was totally unaware. There's a sense that I also realized like my own grief is like, there's like a cosmic aspect to it. Like I just feel like I kind of for a long time have carried this grief that's always been, far wider than my own personal grief. It's a sense of things aren't right. And that, and a lot of people are hurting and suffering. And that has motivated me and really guided a lot of the decisions I make in terms of my sense of calling and what I do.
This ad is sponsored by BetterHelp.
Anthony, as Enneagram 4s, neither of us are strangers to envy, right?
Absolutely.
And it can show up in any sphere of life. Like when I'm driving down the street and I start comparing my house to others, wishing my house was just as big.
Oh yeah, when I'm scrolling through Instagram, for instance, and you see all the cool places that people are traveling, and instead of being happy for them, sometimes I find myself wishing that was my life. It's easy to envy other people's lives, but I try to focus on the things that are important to me rather than what others have.
Right, because it's important to put some practices in place that can help when we catch ourselves in the trance of envy.
Yes.
That's where therapy comes in. A good therapist provides a safe place to not only identify what's triggering to you, but can also help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so you can start living your best life. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp online therapy a try. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and entirely online. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/typologypodcast today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/typologypodcast.
Feels very 4, bro.
Oh, wow.
And I'll say this,
anyway.
It's like, I'm not going to throw the blanket on you, but to me, I'm experiencing you as a 4, even the way you're communicating, and for sure, I mean, that's the way I feel for sure. I'm not saying you are for sure a 4, but yeah.
All we're saying is just go check out Self-Pres 4.
Yeah.
How's that? Go check that out.
Sounds
you
awesome.
You may have such a strong 3 wing that you identify with your wing.
Yeah.
Because there are tons of really, really ambitious 4s. tons of them, super ambitious, want to get things done, are out there. Here's the thing about fours, and maybe someone has told you this before. Has anyone ever told you you're an old soul?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Has anyone ever told you that, boy, or something like this? Boy, just when you thought you got to the bottom of Ben, you realize there's like layers and layers and layers and layers more to Ben than any of us imagined. Like kind of a depth. Yeah.
Yes.
So, and has anyone ever told you that you kind of see the world from odd angles? Like you just sort of see. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Someone like you're a true creative, which really meant was like the way you see things. Like, oh, yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you a yoga teacher as well?
I don't teach yoga. No. Okay. But then on and off practitioner. Well, when I was all into it, it was that was like hot yoga, just let me sweat yoga. Like crazy. Right. Yeah. And now now I don't know yoga in the, the sort of Western understanding of the postures and whatnot, but the emphasis is more on meditation.
These are interests. These are four interests. Just so you know.
Even what you just said, it's like your response to that was like very forced.
Threes don't really. They're not like sitting around like Ben. I bet you on a good day, Reiki is on your list of maybe things you'd like to do. Right?
Oh, get out of here! How do you know?
Yeah. So I'm just saying, like these practices, this kind of stuff. I've kind of scratched my head a little bit, but again, people surprise me by doing things out of quote unquote character or out of type. Yeah. But again, just an interest to your own journey of self-discovery, check it out, see what happens. Yeah. And then, by the way, if you change your mind, then let us know. So we'll have you back on and we'll have like some kind of serious like investigation into it. But now I want to get to your book, man. I want to talk about the way home, discovering the hero's journey to wholeness at midlife. And I was stoked because whenever I see hero's journey, I can specifically remember I was at Bowdoin College in my year one religion class studying Joseph Campbell's Hero with 1,000 Faces and having the top of my head blown off. And I've recently just finished a book in which I talk about the hero's journey, but through the lens of a particular character. Talk to us about the genesis of the book, but then I also do want to talk about the hero's journey quite a bit. Bring us up to speed.
Okay, so I already referenced this moment of kind of burnout, and ended up passing through this 5-6 year what I would talk about as a soul journey, and or coming home to myself, or discovering, welcoming all the different aspects, this journey towards wholeness. And that kind of came to an end. Obviously, there's lots of twists and turns. We can get into more of the texture of that later. But in terms of the book, 2019, I sort of finished. There was like a capstone to that journey. The capstone was I went on a 2-week wilderness quest with Animas Valley Institute. And the kind of pinnacle of that is a 4 days of solitude and fasting. And to me, I call it a capstone sort of deliberately because it was in part, I was like acknowledging my own deaths, so that parts of myself that no longer serve me, that I was dying to. And also as a capstone in the sense of, it felt like it was a completion. It wasn't like a one-off thing. It was like a culmination of what I had undergone for the previous 5 or so years. So this is 2019. And one of the things I was encouraged to do coming out of that is they encourage everyone to like do a project. Like, what's a project you can do that can carry forward what you discovered during this experience, during this journey? And the thing that came to my mind was to do a one-man show for my friends on my 39th birthday. Whoa. So I 6 months later, I'm a former pastor, so I can do the preacher thing, but I kind of always maybe a wannabe stand-up comedian and a little bit of a performance artist in me. So the show I envisioned was kind of a mix of all those things. And so on my 39th birthday, at the small neighborhood theater, about 50 friends came out, and I performed one night only a show called Mr. Mystical. Okay. And it was about my experience. And yes, I love the title. That's maybe my alter ego. But Mr. Mystical, part of what was so powerful about it, this is when I, as I identify as a 3, when I really needed to do it one night only, because it was like in the past, I always was making things out of things, like what's my next plan with it? But it felt really like I just needed to do it once. So I did it once and talked about all these themes that I cover in the book, my own journey. And part of it was to like help people see the stories in their own lives that are at once maybe the most sacred moments they've had, and also can be really ridiculous or foolish. That like sometimes those things often can come together, and they have some, they teach us, they guide us. Anyways, I put it away. A year later, my family and I had moved during the pandemic, as I know a lot of people went through different transitions. We moved back to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I'm from. Around that time, I was getting into some of Joseph Campbell's stuff again. And it's like the light bulb went off. I was like, this isn't surprising. Like, this is exactly what I went through. And I started to, as I got more into that, I was like, well, how would I frame my own journey? Like, it definitely lines up these 3 big phases, which we can get into. But I was like, then how would I talk about maybe instead of 17 steps like Campbell has, something that's a little more accessible? And I ended up pulling together, I just started like writing. I pulled together the Campbell stuff, and I pulled together the reason I brought up this Mr. Mystical stuff. I was like, I started to feel like, oh, there's some unfinished work here. There's like more to mine in those stories. And so it was really those components coming together, along with this significant life transition of leaving the place we had lived for 14 years and being in a new place. And during the pandemic, where there was a little bit more time to be solitary. And I get up early every morning and start to really initially just investigate the story for myself. And then I was like, well, at least it's for my family and friends. And then at some point it became clear. It was like, no, I want to create something that hopefully, will take what I've learned and the other stuff I know about and kind of put it together in a engaging and accessible way to help other people on their journeys, whether those are in midlife or at any other point of change and transition.
This show is sponsored by Earth Breeze. Hey, Ian, you know those Earth Breeze laundry sheets you told us about?
Mm-hmm. Their laundry sheets are ultra-concentrated, liquidless laundry detergent that dissolves in all wash cycles, hot or cold, my friend. No measuring, no mess, and no heavy lifting. In other words, no plastic jug taking up space in the laundry room. It's the best of all worlds. Earth Breeze is tough on stains and odors while being kind to the planet and your skin.
Yeah, I didn't like how messy my liquid detergent got, and that I was leaving my laundry jugs to sit in the landfill for centuries. But not with Earth Breeze. I started using them and love how easy laundry day is now. Did you know these tiny sheets can stop millions of detergent jugs from entering our ecosystems? In fact, 500 million detergent jugs end up in landfills and oceans every single year.
Oh, and I love that full control to adjust, to pause, or cancel my monthly subscription without hidden fees or penalties. Earth Breeze offers flexible subscriptions delivered via carbon offset shipping right to your door for free. Because unfortunately, you'll never run out of laundry, but now you'll also never run out of detergent.
And they offer a 100% satisfaction guarantee. So if you don't like it, you'll get a full refund, no questions asked, and no return necessary.
Right now, Typology listeners can receive 40% off Earth Breeze just by going to earthbreeze.com/typology podcast. That's earthbreeze.com/typology podcast to cut out single-use plastic in your laundry room and claim 40% off your subscription. earthbreeze.com/typology podcast. Well, I think at midlife, right, there's, before I go into that, let's talk about the hero's journey. You've boiled it down to 3 stages versus 17. And I've seen many iterations. We just actually had Donald Miller on, a couple weeks ago? Mm-hmm. Donald's work with has been, he uses that, of course, in the world of marketing and sort of self-understanding to a degree. Now, Don is a real 3.
There you go. So that makes sense.
For you, tell people what the hero's journey is, why it's important, and what your 3 stages are.
Yeah. So Joseph Campbell, as you mentioned, famous 20th century mythologist, wasn't always famous, but kind of later on in that century became famous and became really well known, this idea of the hero's journey, because like George Lucas and other filmmakers were like, this is how we tell stories or how we want to tell stories. But Campbell had looked across different myths and religions, cultural stories, and he identified what he called the monomyth, a single story that's like running through all of these traditions. It takes different shape and whatnot. But as he summed it up in his 3 stages, it was departure, initiation, and return. And then he had these 17 steps that kind of were populated across those stages. So, you can even just kind of hear in your own, whether it's like a relationship or moving or job change, like life is filled with that little cycle right there, departure, leaving something, as I call it, leaving the familiar. And then I talk about the initiation as falling into the unknown. So uncertainty, the dark night of the soul, wandering in the wild, facing your death. And then on the other side, Campbell named it the return. And I talk about it as rising to wholeness. And in my book, one of the steps is return home. But this is the coming back to the world you left behind, coming back to your community. And I will just say, I love writing that section in part because if you think about movies and stories, that's often the one that gets left out the most. Like you have this all the trials and tribulations the quote unquote hero or protagonist went through. And then it's like they get the treasure, they solve the mystery, whatever it is. And then it's like 2 minutes at the end, right? That's the return. And everyone lived happily ever after. You don't like get the complexity of what it is to go on this journey and come back and figure out how to like integrate with the world you left behind. But now you're different. So Those are the ways I talk about it.
So I see if this resonates with you. I actually, this is an idea for a book, which is like the dumbest thing to ever talk about on a podcast because someone else could take it and run it. But to me, like people ask me all the time, and I just wrote about this in a new book, who's my spiritual hero is. And I say, I could say it's Merton. I could say I have a long list of people that I really look up to, but it's really Pinocchio. And Pinocchio is like the ultimate hero's journey story, right? You have this puppet who is not a real boy, but desperately wants to be, who comes into the world. He's animated, but he's not real. Mm-hmm. And he is really at the mercy of the strings of his, his shadow, whatnot, Mickey. So he goes out into the world and he immediately has a series of catastrophically bad misadventures.
Everything goes wrong.
Everything goes wrong. So he comes into the world innocent. Yeah. And he goes on basically kind of on a journey to become a real boy. Mm-hmm. And he goes on this journey. He's got a mentor, right? He's got Jiminy Cricket and he's got the Blue Fairy. And he has this moment where he encounters, he learns that his woodcarver Geppetto has gone looking for him. He's gone missing, and that he's in Monster of the Whale, right? He's been swallowed by Monster of the Whale. So, of course, Pinocchio has to go into the whale, which is the archetype of the shadow. Mm-hmm. He rescues Geppetto, and in the process, he dies. But people don't remember this, that, the little puppet drowns getting Geppetto to shore. But the Blue Fairy says, because of your selflessness, you have died to yourself, right, essentially. And you have faced your shadow, and I bring you back to life, but as a real boy now, not as a puppet. So to me, I always tell people, that's what it's all about.
Yes.
That's the story.
That is it.
So you have a departure, you have an initiation through trial, and then this return. And to your point, I agree with you. I'd never really thought of that typically people don't realize that the back half of the story is the gift that the hero brings from what they've learned on their path. Mm-hmm. So whether that's fire or that's something, they bring something back to the community that is enhancing and life-giving and generative to the community in some way. So beautiful. I love this. Keep going.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like what you're naming there, it's really, it grounds the entire hero's journey, which can be taken as like a super individualistic pursuit, maybe self-absorbed even, and especially as it plays itself out in perhaps movies and whatnot in our culture or the ways it's interpreted. But it always, what you're saying, the return home, that's the part that really grounds and says, this has always been about the human family. This has always been, in your journey of self-discovery and growth, it's never just about you. Even if you start off thinking it's about you, which is like me, I need to find another way to move through the world. It's not sustainable. I'm burned out. I'm exhausted. I'm going through the motions. I'm distant in relationships. Okay, I got to get well, right? And I start peeling back the layers and discover my operating patterns. Still, it's very me focused in a way. And yet get to the bottom, there's a sense that death does occur. And the revelation is, oh, wow, I actually, I'm coming back to life more fully me. And when I do that, the things, the gifts that maybe I offered before, now I can offer them more freely, or maybe there's new ones, or there's always going to be some continuity between who we were before and who we are now, between what we offered before and what we offer now. Like, it's never like you have to start all over. The things, and feels very true in terms of the Enneagram. It's like moving towards integration. It's all about refining the way that you bring yourself to the world. And yeah, there's probably some habits, patterns that need to be left behind, but there absolutely are ones that now you carry forward in a better way that's beyond you, trying to, in an unhelpful, or like trying to ignore your wounds or deal with them in an unhelpful way. And it's actually about really serving and giving that gift to others.
I love that. And I love grounding it in this, I think a lot of people do undertake Enneagram work thinking, well, how do I just improve myself? Or how do I become the best version of myself, which is a phrase I can't stand. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I think I like the term highest expression of yourself, but just anyway. Yeah. The thing I would say about the hero's journey is, from your perspective, I guess, is that everybody's on it, whether they know it or not. Am I right? Like you're on a journey.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so one of the ways I get at, and the journey is always happening. So the 10th chapter, the epilogue in my book is begin again. The idea that even after you go through this, the falling, or the leaving, the falling, the rising, like, guess what? Yeah. If you've truly gone on that journey, one of the things you've learned is you can't just remain or stay put. Like, there's always going to be, I mentioned this in the book. It's like watching the end of Back to the Future. And so, you just watch this amazing story, and then suddenly, Marty McFly's back in his parents' driveway with his girlfriend Jennifer, and suddenly Doc Brown comes, pulls up into the driveway again in a DeLorean, and he's like, I'm from the future, and he's like, Marty, it's your kids, and you're like, okay, the story starts over again. Like, this is how our actual lives are. So there's that sense of the journey's ongoing, but also, what I say at the outset of the book is there are a million ways to lose your heart. And what I'm getting at in that is that you don't have to wait. Like, we love the big stories of like the catastrophic failure and everything falling apart. And then like a phoenix rising from the ashes, so-and-so came back and Tiger Woods won the Masters again eventually. And whatever the thing is, we love those stories. Those stories sell a lot of books. They make for good movies. But in reality, we all have our own journey that we're like living out every day. And so how do we pay attention to the ways that our life is trying to speak to us, so that when it's time to leave, we take that next step, even if we don't know where it's leading us. And
yet, by virtue of the title, right, The Way Home, Discovering the Hero's Journey to Wholeness at Midlife, midlife seems to be a liminal moment, right? It's a moment when many of the kinds of questions where we've kind of exhausted ourselves, we've done our misadventures, we find we've lost touch with our hearts. We start to ask a whole different set of questions than we asked in the first 35 years, right? And you would define, as I understand it, right, midlife, let's say, being between 35 and 65. Right?
Yeah, ish. Yeah, I'd say it's probably always expanding, but I would say that.
And I agree with, and I know that you're familiar with Richard Rohr's work, and Richard would say that midlife, he's about 28-year-olds in midlife, 26-year-olds, right? But they've had some profound experience of suffering or of something, like where they've been completely upended.
They've been initiated earlier. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, they're ahead of schedule. Yeah. So tell me about why instead of this, why is this Discovering the Hero's Journey to Wholeness at Midlife? Why is it that instead of just Discovering the Hero's Journey to Wholeness?
Can I say publisher's decision? I mean, that's
you can, and I would understand.
Yes, you would get it, and I would say, I could take it or leave it, because I think on one hand, absolutely what I described, given I was about 34, 35 when I found myself on this path, so it absolutely was midlife. Now, I don't sit around, I don't unpack midlife. I actually wonder how many times that word even occurs in the book. It's probably a handful, but so it's absolutely relevant for people who have accumulated enough life experience, right? And they've got enough data, and now something within them is like, for whatever reason, their soul is trying to get their attention now and say, hey, you don't want to keep going forward like this. Like, there's another way, right? So there's that. But it's also for all these, it's for people who are younger than that. It's for really any of those moments where, something has fallen apart. We have lost a loved one, or we're dealing with an illness, or we've lost a job, or we've moved across the country. These are all moments that invite us into this reflection. And in that sense, we could say midlife is really a hinge point between life as you've known it and like what's ahead, or who you've been and who you're becoming. So I think there's lots of ways to think about it. And if we think about it in that second way there, the reality is we could say we all have multiple midlives, meaning multiple moments in our lives where we're turning the page.
So in the book, you talk about ritual practices, and we've mentioned some of them here at the front end, and you refer to them as technologies that humans have used across place and time to awaken us to the gift of life that we are experiencing. And they're a big piece of the journey home. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We've mentioned a few. You have, for example, you've mentioned yoga, meditation. What other kinds of stuff do you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the story is building out a toolkit, so to speak. Not that I was trying to accumulate all these things, but it was realizing, what else might be helpful? Actually, I will flag this up front. I think we're living in a moment where if you are on, Instagram, you don't have to look far to be like, there are all these different modalities and things that people are telling me about. And quite frankly, it is exhausting.
Yes,
this kind of meditation and that kind of meditation and this kind of plant medicine and that kind, and, this breath work and that breath work. It's like so many different things, or this supplement or this cacao, what ceremony, so many different things. So, I want to say up front, like, just acknowledge that. And it's really important not to get, you can get lost in that. So, what I share in the book is essentially stuff that I feel like I stumbled upon. And, whether it was like a wise guide introduced me or it was following my curiosity, I don't think I was trying to like master anything. So I'm not even the expert in any of these things. I maybe with the exception of meditation, which I've dedicated a lot of time and training to, et cetera. But most of these, as I talk about in the book, can they be jumping off points for people to follow their own curiosity? Now, what would some of those be? During that season of life, more than now, though I still do keep a dream journal, but just working with your dreams is a powerful way of tending to your inner life, right? You're listening. Doesn't mean you necessarily are like interpreting everything and understanding it all, but it just is allowing space for the subconscious to speak, to move. Another one that continues to be is probably like one of my go-tos is just the practice of, it's called the wander in the wild, or a nature wander. You could call it a walk in nature, call it whatever you want, but it's different than like trying to summit a peak or get all your steps in, or a really ambitious hike. This is a practice of getting out in the wild, whether that's some, like national park space, or, national forest or something, some remote area, or it could be the park down the street, or it could be a tiny corner of your backyard. But showing up and really paying attention, quieting down, and noticing. It's in a sense, it's a dialogue, like an energetic dialogue with a place. Like, maybe there's that bird. What if you just let that bird be that bird? And what if it's actually pointing you somewhere? Now, it takes some imagination and playfulness to kind of enter this state. But as Bill Plotkin, whose work I interact with in the book, as he talks about, nature is a mirror for the human soul. And in that sense, there's just, a lesson in every moment. So dream work, wanders. I think I even talk about just getting help, or the idea of an anamkara, a spiritual friend. Like that would be one of the foundational practices. Chapter 2 of the book is get help. Can you, whether it's a dear friend, a soul friend, an anamkara, or it's someone like a spiritual director or therapist, it's critical that we have those people who can really, just like nature in a way, but like serve as a mirror, help us see ourselves, be real, be raw, be vulnerable. That's step one, really, primary step for our own healing.
Well, Ben, I love this because what you're stoking in me is my love for James Hillman, James Hollis. I hear echoes of that in here. and also Joseph Campbell, and all these thinkers about the interior life and the journey toward wholeness, and what Merton called our hidden wholeness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just think this is a very, very important book for people to get their hands on who feel like at this moment in their life that their soul is summoning them to something greater than the life they're living. So I want to commend it to everybody. I'm talking, of course, to our new friend, Ben Katt. Maybe an Enneagram 3, maybe an Enneagram 4. We don't know. He's the author of The Way Home, Discovering the Hero's Journey to Wholeness at Midlife. But we're going to bracket at midlife now, just to say it's just Discovering the Hero's Journey to Wholeness. It's really a book for everybody, regardless of where you are on the journey. Though at midlife, you may find yourself particularly interested in the topic. Don't be surprised if. Ben, how do people learn more about the book?
You can go to thewayhomebook.com. That'll take you to a page on my website, and you can find out all about it and get more links to see where you can buy it. But you can buy it anywhere. You can listen to it on audiobook, Spotify. I got to narrate the book. That was a lot of fun. Cool. So, wherever books are sold, kind of thing.
Wonderful. Well, I feel enriched by this conversation, Anthony. How about you?
Same. Yeah.
We've had some good conversations today.
Plus, I think we've found another good comrade.
Maybe. Man, you are really weighing in. We are weighing in today.
Yeah.
I might do it just so I can be a part of the club. That sounds cool.
Anthony has book on this one, man. I mean, I'm kind of amazed at how he's put it out there. This last meeting, he's like, no nonsense now, man. He's like, I'm so tired of not speaking my mind.
So do you put the Enneagram type on? Don't you list it on every episode? So what will you do? I mean, if I'm in between.
We'll just say, what the hell?
Okay,
we'll just say, Ben Katt, what the hell? We don't know.
I can't wait to get into that. This is exciting for me.
Well, who knows? Part of the journey. And those of you listening, thanks for being on the journey with us. And you know how this goes. May you have love. May you have joy. May you have peace. May you have healing. May you have rest. Until next time.
Marketing is hard. But I'll tell you a little secret. It doesn't have to be. Let me point something out. You're listening to a podcast right now, and it's great. You love the host. You seek it out and download it. You listen to it while driving, working out, cooking, even going to the bathroom. Podcasts are a pretty close companion. And this is a podcast ad. Did I get your attention? You can reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Libsyn Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a pre-produced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience and their favorite podcasts with Libsyn Ads. Go to libsynads.com, that's LIBSYN, ads.com today.